Welcome to another exciting episode of StraussNet Sports Radio. It is March 14th, 2024. I find it funny that I used Real Big Fish, Life Sucks, Let's Dance. I think that'd be a fun open for an NCAA show, but I'm just going to be completely honest. I've watched maybe 2 whole games, and those weren't the same 2 games of NCAA basketball all year. So I'll be doing a bracket, but that'll be totally based on stats. The non-analytics guy will be using analytics to do an NCAA bracket. When I left you back in February, the Super Bowl was about to commence. It was media day, and the Chiefs were the underdogs to some degree against the 49ers. A lot of people thought the 49ers were going to win. The Chiefs did it. They pulled off a little bit of a comeback. They won in overtime. It was a great game. For all the talk about the Chiefs didn't have what they should, they won. They did it. This is like the stuff Brady would do. Mahomes is a god at this point. Chris Jones has been signed. We'll see if they can get Snead signed up. But at this point, as long as they have Reed and Mahomes, they'll be fine. Let's just be completely honest there. Go Chiefs. Congratulations. Great Super Bowl. Back-to-back. First time since the Patriots of the Super Bowl 38-39 in the early 2000s. So now it is on to my favorite time of year, baseball season. This is the official 2024 spring training show. It is the first regular spring training we've had since 2019. 2020 we had the COVID shutdown and then summer camp midsummer. 21 there were all the rules and stuff, so even though time frame it was normal, it wasn't normal for the players. They talked about it. 22 had the lockout dip into spring training, so it was like a 2-3 week spring training. World Baseball Classic last year, and the weirdest thing this spring is the jersey fiasco, where the jerseys are now being designed a little bit different by Nike and produced a little shoddily by Fanatics, and they're working on it. But in terms of the actual play, it's spring training, and I am happy to have one of my co-hosts with me, my dad, Mark Strauss.
Hello.
We do not have Tim today. I did text him for information. He is busy. Maybe I will record a segment later and put him on it with what he thinks is going to happen. I am going to use some of Tim's information for betting purposes later. But the big part of this show, we're going to talk about as good as my predictions have been over the last year. Anybody who's listened to this knows that if I'm picking someone, maybe go another route. It's just been bad, except for the Super Bowl and the World Series. When I put money on it, it's great. So maybe I need to go put $20 on the Cardinals to win it all, because I picked the World Series and the Super Bowl, and now I'm thinking about putting money on the Rangers to win the Stanley Cup Final. But that's beside the point. We're going to talk about, for the most part of the show, we're going to go division by division, what we think these teams can do, what some of their off-season moves have been, and then kind of lay out what we think the playoff scenario is. And we'll get into a little over-under stuff at the end of the show if we have time, but mainly this is predictions. At this exact moment, March 14th, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery have not been signed. Those are maybe the biggest 2 pieces. Bellinger did sign with the Cubs, Matt Chapman with the Giants. Who else is out there?
J.D. Martinez.
Yes. Jock Peterson went to the Diamondbacks. J.D. Martinez is out there. I've read a couple other names. Tommy Pham is still out there. But right now, if you add someone like a Snell or a Montgomery to any of these teams that we're about to talk about, it changes things completely. And I will mention that when we get to some of those teams. But for now, let's dive in. I'm going to do this. Let's go National League first, and we're going to go East, Central, West. We'll do our 3 wild cards. And then I told Mark here, I want a first out, your bubble team, if you will. So let's start with the National League East, where some of the juggernauts were last year.
You want me to go first, or are you going to go first?
No, you go ahead. Tell me what you think of the NL East.
Well, I don't know if did you bring a list of our picks from last year?
I don't have that paper. I will make a note to save this one.
Yeah.
Without going back and listening, I want to say we both talked about the Phillies and the Braves last year. Although I had the Mets winning the World Series. So.
What I remember about last year was that I told you that Arizona was going to be in the playoffs.
Yes, I remember.
And they wound up in the World Series because they have such a talented young team. I think I picked the Yankees in the AL East. I think I picked the Twins in the Central. I think I picked the Astros in the West. so I was wrong about the Yankees. And in the National League, yes, we both picked the Braves and the Phillies to make the playoffs. I think I picked the Cardinals to win the Central, and they finished last.
I thought you said that you picked somebody else to win the Central.
Maybe it was Milwaukee.
Yeah, because I was talking about the Cardinals, and you said you didn't have that high of hopes of them.
No.
I think you had them out. I think I was the only one of us to take them.
And I know I picked the Dodgers, and I picked the Diamondbacks, and I think I may have picked the Padres.
You were in on Seattle. I know that.
Yes.
You were talking about them because they made the playoffs 2 years ago, and you said, "Oh, they're going to be better." They were, but they had some slumping and injuries in the first half. So,
well, anyway, I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
No,
there,
you're okay.
I just want to point out that how inaccurate many of my picks were. So,
well, I had the Chargers going to the Super Bowl, so, and the Bengals and Joe Burrow
right.
and MVP. So
well, we're starting in the National League East this year.
National League East.
I'm going to pick the Braves and the Phillies again, because how can you not, with the lineups that both teams have and with the pitching rotations that both teams have? When you look at the Braves rotation, they added Chris Sale to Strider and Fried. They still have Charlie Morton, who I think won 14 games last year. So even though he's 40-plus years old, until he stops being effective, I have to consider him to still be, he's their number 4 starter. And it looks like Ronaldo Lopez will be their 5th starter this year. So I'm picking the Braves to win the National League East, and I'm picking the Phillies as one of my 3 wild card teams.
And I'm writing that down so I have that information in front of me. I'm doing the exact same thing, actually. I have Atlanta winning the East, and I have Philly as, not that the slotting matters, but I slotted mine where I think they're going to be. I have Philly as my first wild card. I think they're both very good for the exact reasons you said. They've both got a lot of pitching, a lot of lineup. Chris Sale says he feels healthier than he has in a couple of years. He made a decent number of starts last year. Sometimes a guy coming off of injuries can take a minute to get reoriented. So I'm taking Atlanta. A lot of people talked about how the playoffs have affected these teams that get to rest, and that Atlanta was a great cross-country runner, but they weren't very good with the short track in the postseason, especially not getting to start off the bat, sitting out a week. So I'm going Atlanta, and I am going Philadelphia. I can't put anything on the Marlins right now because of the loss of Sandy Alcantara. They made the playoffs last year, and they were good, but I can't see them making the playoffs. Unfortunately,
they didn't really replace him. So, and they're not a team that's going to spend money or ever give up their prospects to haul in a big name. So, yeah, they're probably not going anywhere. They might be spinning their wheels around 500. We'll see what happens with them.
Now, I like the Mets lineup still. I know they're kind of retooling. They said, let's go for it, and then it didn't work. So they're kind of they're walking it back, and they want to build from inside. The thing that really is the downfall for the Mets for me right now is they just don't have the pitching.
Nope.
I think if you give the Mets the Phillies rotation, I could be convinced on the Mets with the lineup they have. But they just don't have it right now. And, Jose Quintana is going to be the opening day starter because now Senga is hurt, who had a great season last year. The Nationals are still building. They have some nice pieces. They're going to be good in a few years with the young pieces they've acquired. But, I'm not saying that's the order all that division is going to finish in, but I'm with you. Braves, Phillies. Let's move on to the NL Central. And I will start this one, volley back and forth here. I am going to take the Cardinals, not just to be a homer, but for the division winner. Here's my thinking. They won over 90 games 2 years ago with a very questionable rotation as it was back then. You had Wainwright healthy, but they didn't have a healthy Jack Flaherty or anything. They had Michaelis have a great year, but then Michaelis was bad last year. And they had to add pitchers in the second half like Montgomery and Quintana in 22. A lot got overshadowed by Albert Pujols. I think that put a bigger sparkling bow on the 22 season than it really probably had. I don't think this is that much different from the 22 season. I just think last year got so off the rails that if you just look at, law of averages says they're going to come back up. They're going to be better than they were last year no matter what, unless everyone gets hurt. They signed Sonny Gray. He is dealing with a hamstring injury, but the news today is he is throwing pain-free. He has been able to keep throwing. He is still on track to, if not pitch opening day, pitch in the Dodgers series. That was today's news. That is breaking. They said that he is right now on track. TBD, but on track. They did add Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, who can pitch innings, so they're not going to be wearing their new built bullpen down. Miles Michaelis should be better. I think Lance Lynn's going to be better than he was with the White Sox last year. He was better in LA. If Lynn's like he was 2 years ago, if Michaelis is closer to 2 years ago, that's not that far away, their rotation is going to be better. I think what can make the Cardinals great and compete with other teams, not just their division, is that guys like Victor Scott, the young guys, if they are willing to integrate this young talent in with the guys they already have, they have a good lineup, but they could be more dynamic if they're willing to run, use guys like a Victor Scott. If Mason Wynn's going to really be, if they're really going to dedicate to the defense of Mason Wynn, no matter how he hits, and I think he'll eventually hit, but they're going to be better. The Cubs are not much different from last year. Imanaga is a replacement for Stroman. I like him. We'll see how he does. Getting Bellinger back was huge, but they haven't really added to what they did last year, and they didn't make the playoffs. I like the Reds. I think their young talent is coming along. I don't think they're that far off. They could surprise everyone and win this division, in my opinion. Them and the Cubs are really close to... I don't think the Cardinals are going to win this by a lot, but I think the Cardinals will win it. And Milwaukee's just, they've lost players. Devin Williams has fractures in his back. And then you have Pittsburgh, who's good. I can't underestimate them, but they're not with them. So I'm taking the Cardinals, and that'll be the only team I take from this division. I do have one of them as my first out, but we'll do first out after we fill the playoff field.
All right. I'm picking the Cincinnati Reds to win the Central Division. They're loaded with young talent, which is maturing right before our eyes with Matt McClain and Spencer Steer and Christian Encarnacion Strand, Ellie De La Cruz. I mean, this is a team that has so many good young players that they didn't have a place for Joey Votto, who's going to have his number retired sometime in the future in Cincinnati, to stay on the roster. And he's now with Toronto on a minor league contract. T.J. Friedel. They brought in Frankie Montas, which is sort of a dice roll, but he's pitched okay in spring training. They have a lot of pitching depth. Yes, they're all young pitchers. Hunter Green, Graham Ashcraft. Nick Martinez has been really good in spring training and was very good in the bullpen and as a swingman for the Padres last year. I think he's going to help them. Andrew Abbott at the back of the rotation. Nick Lodolo at some point, when he's healthy and capable, is going to be in that rotation. So they actually have more pitchers than they have starting pitcher slots for. I think they're going to win the division. I think they're going to win anywhere between 90 and 93 games. And I have the Cubs as finishing second and the first out.
So you have the Cubs not making the playoffs.
Not making the playoffs.
Okay, so spoiler alert, that's mine too. I was going to do mine after we did wild card, but that's okay. I agree with you.
The Cubs are not a bad team. They're a better than 500 team. They're a competitive team. But as you said, their big addition this year was a pitcher who's never played in Major League Baseball, and Imanaga.
And it's still a 1-for-1. Like they lose Stroman, they add Imanaga.
And they added Hector Neris, who's one of the outstanding setup men in baseball, who pitched for the Astros the last couple of years. So he's back in the National League. And he will help their bullpen. Their bullpen could be better. Adbert Alzolay was very good in the closer role last year. So they go into the regular season with those things kind of cemented, which is good for them. But I don't think they'll make the playoffs. And then Cardinals probably third. I see them as a 500 team. You mentioned that they have young players that are going to be emerging with the team as we move forward. Like you mentioned, Victor Scott, and there are others. But they already have a lot of young players. Except for Goldschmidt, Arenado, and Contreras, everybody on that field, Donovan, Mason Wynn, Newt Barr, Carlson, Jordan Walker, whoever you put out there, they're all young players. They're in the stage of their career where they only have a year, 2, 3 years under their belts. So this is already a young team in terms of the position players. The pitching staff is old, and they're going to have to be good and resilient. They do have some people in the minor leagues and on the roster who are younger pitchers. Zach Thompson, Max Rakchik, Gordon Graceffo, and after this year, when those one-year contracts with Gibson and Lynn expire, some of those guys are going to have to step in. And I think Matz has one more year on his contract after this.
It was a 4-year, so if you have him 22, 23, 24, and 25.
Yeah, so next year will be his last year.
Now, on ESPN St. Louis, they made an interesting point during the Fast Lane. They said, if you get off to a rough start, but like salvageable, but you're having trouble with Lynn or Matz or Gibson, how quick would the Cardinals be to, as they put it, rip the Band-Aid off? Either just dump them and let the young pitchers pitch. Even if it means you're going to have a 500 season, like, all right, I'm putting Liberatore, Thompson, whoever the next guy up, Tink Hintz, somebody they think can make the team. Do you just put those guys in, rip that Band-Aid off, and see what happens?
I think with an aged pitching staff, they won't probably have to do that because not everybody's going to stay healthy. And it doesn't matter. There's almost no pitching rotation in baseball that stays healthy for the entire season. Sometimes you see one guy get hurt, rehab, and by the time he comes back, another guy in the rotation gets hurt. So I wouldn't even worry about that because those things kind of work themselves out.
I think the Cardinals, they're interesting because, like I said, I think they'll be better. Their willingness to adjust is going to be what makes or breaks them. If Victor Scott is good enough to make this team and performs, and he can add a dynamic element to their running game, but they're so set in their ways that they want to keep the guys at the major league level, that's just acting like they did last year. Instead of saying, look, when they signed Albert Pujols a couple years ago, and I even poo-pooed it saying they're just selling tickets here, they did start off by playing Corey Dickerson against righties and Pujols against lefties, and as Pujols started to figure it out, they were willing to play him more. Now, you can do that with Albert Pujols, Hall of Famer and Cardinal legend. Will they do that with Victor Scott, Mason Wynn?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into all of that because that's a whole different set of circumstances. Tony La Russa was the manager. He was allowed to make decisions.
I'm talking about 2 years ago.
Well, okay. But one of the things that's not helpful to the Cardinals right now, if they hope to contend or be a better than 500 team this year, is the cloud over Tommy Edman. This wrist surgery that he had in the offseason, he was supposed to be ready for spring training. He wasn't. Now, they're not sure when he's going to be ready to do anything to get himself back in shape to play center field, which is the most demanding outfield position.
My favorite quote of the day is when John Mozeliak was asked about Tommy Edman earlier in the month, he said it would take him a little while longer to do certain baseball activities, such as hit and throw. And it's like, okay, what does that leave you with? Running and catching? I mean, so like you're saying, they don't know what's going to happen with Edman. But I think, like I said, I think they have the players to compensate for that. He is a very good player, but are they willing to? Like a couple of years ago, we saw when one of the outfielders wasn't going to be ready for opening day, and they put Justin Williams out there in right, saying, oh, he's a good defender, and if he hits, great. And they never really went away from that philosophy as they floundered early on. It's like, hey, why don't you put Elaine Thomas out there? Why don't you just put this is when Bader was out, and they moved Carlson from right to center. And if they're going to stick with that logic of, oh, well, we'll just pick a guy who can handle it, they need to be more aggressive. Now, on the Cubs side, the other team that you and I are talking about alongside Cincinnati. Cincinnati's not going to do much in the adding department. They have their young team. They're going to be good. Even whether they make the playoffs or not, they're going to be a dangerous team. For the Cubs, the other team trying to fight to be in this race, will they be willing to make another addition? in early offseason, they kind of said they want to stick with internal options. They did go out and re-sign Bellinger. They added this Bush guy from the Dodgers. They made a trade, and he has a good power. He's not necessarily a great fielder. He's a third baseman, first baseman. Could be their first baseman to start the year. Pete Crow Armstrong was sent down. I don't think he was hitting. It'll be interesting to see if the Cubs are contending. Let's say they lead the division by the end of May. Will they start thinking about making a trade? Or if one of these pitchers is still on the market, would they be willing to go further than they financially want to sign someone?
No, they won't. They're not going to do that. They brought Bellinger back because that was kind of a lateral move financially, the way I see it. You were just replacing him with himself, and yeah, you're paying him more money than you did last year. But that's a guy that sells tickets and draws interest and is a productive player. But I don't think they're going to do that. Where they really need to do something, in my opinion, is with their pitching staff. I think they thought when they got Jameson Taillon he was going to be better than he was last year, and maybe he will bounce back. Jordan Wicks is more than likely in the rotation this year. Kyle Hendricks is on the backside of his career, so you don't know how much longer you're going to have him. They're certainly not going to do it with a position player because they have, as you mentioned, Pete Crow Armstrong. They have Owen Casey, who's maybe even a better hitter than Pete Crow Armstrong. They've got some really good players in the minor leagues, and they're not going to block those players.
It is interesting to see how they've gone from another team that is going from, okay, we have to spend it all to win, and they did. Yeah. To, all right, now we want to do something more long-term. Even if it means not being successful from a playoff standpoint for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And they did, their biggest acquisition was the manager. They went out and got Craig Counsell from the rival Brewers, a guy who's seen as one of the best managers in baseball right now, somebody who has done a really good job.
On a limited budget.
And also like combining the ideas of the analytics movement and traditional baseball sense, where he is aware of those numbers and is willing to play with them, but also if he trusts a guy, he trusts a guy.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of teams talk about this. We'll get to the Red Sox and the AL East, but the Red Sox have said they think that they have some talented pitchers. A lot of people think they don't have enough pitching. They're like, no, the analytics is going to make up for that. The Cubs are going a route of the numbers and the manager can get a bump out of this roster that they didn't have last year. I don't know if that's true. We're going to find out, but they're definitely a dangerous team. Let's move on to the West, and I will put it back to you to give me your West pick.
Well, I mean, it's a no-brainer to pick the Dodgers. They're an all-star team. They're the new Yankees, the Yankees of the past. They're just almost like the George Steinbrenner Yankees, where they'll spend any amount of money to get anybody they want. They added Yamamoto. They added Ohtani. There's a lot of fanfare over every player that ever comes over from Japan or Asia. And as good as Yamamoto looks, you never know how they're going to perform in Major League Baseball. They haven't thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball yet. Senga was outstanding last year. He was one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. So if Yamamoto, two aces, because they now have Tyler Glasnow, who was the ace of the Rays staff and was able to pitch 120 innings last year. He is always bothered by injuries, so nobody knows how long he's going to be able to pitch. But they also have Bobby Miller, who was a rookie last year and was at least one of their top pitching prospect. Turned out he was the best pitching prospect they had of the three major pitching prospects that they brought up last year. And then waiting in the wings are the rehabbing Walker Buehler and Clayton Kershaw.
And Tony Gonsolin.
I don't know if Gonsolin's going to pitch this year.
Yeah. He had Tommy John last September.
Yeah,
I think he's
I think he's out for the year. Dustin May is expected to come back at some point this season.
They signed James Paxton, who was actually pretty good with the Red Sox last year at times as a stopgap. They have a lot of options there.
Yeah, so they're very, very deep in pitching, and it's not just pitchers, it's pitchers who've had big success in the past.
It's interesting because the Cardinals went out, besides the whole controversy of we're going to sign 3 high-end pitchers, and they signed 3 pitchers. The Dodgers went out and signed a lot of really good, reliable pitchers, even though they're going to puzzle piece it together. Like, this guy will be hurt now, we have him, and then when he gets hurt, this guy will be back.
Well, I think you'll see a lot of situations where the Dodgers try to use a 6-man rotation, especially with bringing Yamamoto in. He's used to pitching once a week.
Their lineup's interesting because they've moved Mookie Betts all over. They've already moved him twice from last year to this year. He is no longer the right fielder. They're going to let Jason Hayward be part of a platoon out there. He was going to be the second baseman with Gavin Lux, who was supposed to be the shortstop last year but got hurt. But they flipped them. Now Mookie's going to play short because Gavin Lux was having trouble at shortstop. They're going to let Lux play second where he played for them a couple years ago. And it just... I've always been a big fan of Mookie Betts, but now it's just like everything he does is like he's going to the Hall of Fame at this point. If he plays a reasonable shortstop, which he thinks he can be a Gold Glove shortstop, then at this point Mookie Betts is a Hall of Famer. He's been in the World Series with multiple teams. He's been the best guy at his position in the outfield. Now he's going to try it on the infield. He runs, he hits. The guy's amazing. And, oh, by the way, there's this guy named Ohtani hitting behind him, followed by this guy named Freeman.
I hadn't gotten to the hitters yet.
Yeah.
So they bring in Ohtani, too. So, I mean, it's like I said, it's a no-brainer to pick the Dodgers. And really, they have a tremendous amount of pressure on them because they should win. They have the best team in Major League Baseball. Without a doubt, they have more pitching depth. They have the deepest lineup. They have all-stars at multiple positions. I mean, a few years ago, if you look at the Dodgers, you would look at Max Muncy and say, "Oh, he's one of the stars of the team." Well, now you don't even mention Max Muncy until after you've mentioned Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Ohtani, Will Smith.
They went out and got Teoscar Hernandez to shore up the outfield.
Yeah, he's going to be a great addition for them, hitting in that lineup. There's nobody to pitch around. If you walk one guy, the next guy is just as formidable. So it's easy to pick the Dodgers. There's no reason why they shouldn't win their division. There's no reason why they shouldn't win the National League. There's no reason why they shouldn't win the World Series. We will see if that happens. That's the thing about baseball, is that the regular season doesn't matter anymore. In a previous era, the Dodgers would have been the Yankees of the Mickey Mantle era, where they won their league every year and went straight to the World Series. But that doesn't happen now.
This is kind of what we're seeing throughout a lot of sports. I mean, they were talking about on NHL trade deadline day how Vegas just won the Stanley Cup. And they were really active at the deadline, and people are saying, oh, yeah, Vegas is a favorite to win the Stanley Cup this year. Do you know they're currently the last team in the West to get in?
Well,
and that's how it is. The last 2 years, the National League representative in the World Series is one of the last 2 teams in.
So the Dodgers, I'm picking to win the West. The Diamondbacks, who made it to the World Series last year before losing to the Rangers, are my wild card team. They made a few tweaks to their team, nothing big, but they added a very, very good starting pitcher in Eduardo Rodriguez to come in behind Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly to give them a really good top of the rotation. They still got some young pitchers like Fought and others, Ryan Nelson. They are a year older and a little better, and now they have the confidence that they can compete with teams like the Dodgers and the Braves and the Phillies. And so I'm going to pick them as my wild card in the West, and I'm also going to pick the Padres as a wild card team because they have an excellent rotation. especially after what they did last night when they acquired Dylan Cease from the White Sox to go with Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove. I know a lot of people have questions about Yu Darvish. He wasn't quite as good last year, but he's been very good in spring training. And oh yeah, by the way, when they traded Juan Soto to the Yankees, they got a bunch of pitchers, including a guy that I really like, Michael King, who was very effective for the Yankees when they moved him into the starting rotation last year. He was almost as good as Garrett Cole. And he will be their number 3 or number 4 starter. And then the 5th starter is either going to be Johnny Brito or Randy Vasquez. So their pitching is really good. Michael King replaces Seth Lugo, who's with the Royals now. They have a top prospect named Jackson Merrill, who it looks like is going to be with the club when they go to Korea, so he'll be on the Major League roster, and he may even be the starting center fielder when the season opens. And that's how they hope to replace Juan Soto. And they have a new manager, Mike Schilt, who Cardinal fans are familiar with. In his 3 years with the Cardinals went to the playoffs every year and won divisions with him. So I'm going to pick the Padres as my 3rd wild card team. And again, the Cubs are my last out. So my again, just to recap, my Eastern Division winner is Atlanta. My Central Division winner is the Cincinnati Reds. The Dodgers win the West, and my 3 wild cards are the Phillies, the Diamondbacks, and the Padres.
All right, so I'm in almost the same place as you. I am the same place as you for the West. I've got the Dodgers. I don't see why they can't win the division. I think the Diamondbacks have a chance to win the division. They could surprise. I really like the Diamondbacks. I said to you when they got Eduardo Rodriguez, they went to the World Series essentially with a 3-man rotation. Well, they just added a really good 4th. He'll probably slot higher than 4th, but there's no reason they can't do some of what they did last year again. They could still go out and sign a J.D. Martinez. They've got Eugenio Suarez now as their 3rd baseman, so they're adding offense where they didn't have it. So they got better. I agree with you on pretty much everything you said about the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks. I also have San Diego. So we are down the line the same, except for the NL Central, where I'm giving the Cardinals the edge. I do think, if the Cardinals completely tank, I think Cincinnati's going to benefit. Even though I have Cubs as my first out, I don't see them as more than a wild card. I think the variable for Cincinnati could push them to a division winner because of all that young talent. But I'm gonna stick to my guts and say St. Louis wins it. I really like San Diego. I probably would have had the Cubs in 48 hours ago, but after the Padres, I had Dylan Cease. They lose Snell. There's no guarantee they've lost Snell either. He is on the market still. They could try to get him back, and I don't think it's impossible. I think they will give one of these younger guys a chance. I almost think for them, the Soto loss is bigger than Blake Snell right now, having added a Dylan Cease. Yeah, Jackson Merrill is going to be added, but you can't replicate. You can't replicate Juan Soto, and Manny Machado is going to be the DH instead of 3rd baseman, at least early on. So we'll see how they fill out their lineup. I think Schilt is good at filling those gaps, going with what's working, not overanalyzing numbers. I'm not thrilled with Jake Cronenworth as the 3 hitter. He did not have a great season last year. You do have Tatis to start the year, so in theory for a full season. They're going to try Bogaerts at 2nd base because the metrics say that Kim is the better shortstop. Bogaerts has always been seen as an average shortstop. We'll see how he is at 2nd. I really like the Padres. Any of these teams could win the World Series for me. We'll get to World Series picks after we do the AL East, though. So, my dad, Mark, he said Atlanta, Cincy, Dodgers. I said Atlanta, St. Louis, Dodgers. We both had the exact same rest of the way. Philly, Arizona, San Diego, and the Cubs will be your bubble team. I'm going to take a quick timeout, which online is meaningless, but I'm going to take a quick timeout just so we can save our progress here. This is StraussNet Sports Radio. Welcome back to StraussNet Sports Radio, Spring Training 2024 edition. I will warn you, my computer program claims that I had a drop in audio somewhere. I do not see it, so I apologize if there's any lost audio. You may comment below if at a timestamp if you find that, and I can always re-upload or comment back with or make another post if I have to. But my program says I have everything. So if there's some glaring problem, someone please let me know. Otherwise, onward. So we did the National League. Now we're going to say what we think is going to happen that will probably burn down in fiery flames eventually with the American League. So we're going to start out in the East. I gave you the first go last time. I'm going to take it, and I don't think I'm far off from what you're thinking here. I'm taking the Baltimore Orioles. Baltimore won 100 games last year and had a fantastic season with the likes of Adley Rutschman and I almost said Jackson Holliday. I'm not there yet. Gunnar Henderson and company. Well, this year they're adding somebody like Jackson Holliday, and oh wait, they have Corbin Burns. The biggest problem they had in the playoffs against Texas was that they didn't have a real ace. Now, they are losing Bradish for some period of time, but they add Corbin Burns to that mix. Who says they're not going to add more? Because they have a new ownership group. So the financial restraints of yesteryear may be gone. It is different now. So I don't think Baltimore is going to be worse. Now, I would take the under on 100 wins. I never bet on 100 wins, but I think the Orioles can beat anybody else in this division, with the likes of, there's the standings. Baltimore, Tampa, I think got worse because they lost, they don't have McClanahan. They don't have Glass now. They always find a way to win. They always do. It's hard to bet against them. I actually don't have them in the playoffs. They are my first out. Toronto, I think they have a really nice rotation with, Barrios and Bassett and company. So, and we'll do more about that. They're actually my one of my wild card teams, Toronto. So I think the Orioles and the Blue Jays will go to the playoffs. Let's actually look at that Toronto rotation real quick because they have, I said Barrios and that Manoah, if he bounces back, Chris Bassett, they have Kikuchi. Oh, I'm forgetting Gossman, who was fantastic last year. I just don't see Toronto going away. They won, like 89 games last year. They're a good team. So I have those two. Boston didn't do much to their team this year to get better. They went out and got Lucas Giolito hoping to spark fire, and now he's done for the year with a UCL injury in his elbow. So I've got Baltimore and Toronto. The Yankees are kind of my, no pun intended, wild card. I actually don't have the Yankees in the playoffs. I'm going to put the Yankees first out. I'm sorry. I did this morning, and I wrote out my American League was really hard. So scratch that. Not Tampa. Yankees are my first out in the American League. I just couldn't put them ahead of everyone after the Garrett Cole news that broke the last couple of days. He has an elbow injury. He's going to miss at least 2 months. They were saying on Colin Cowherd's show that, look, if you think the Yankees can, win another few games out of each of their other starting pitchers, but I just, with Baltimore being in the mix and Toronto still being as good as they are, I don't know if I can put the Yankees in the playoffs. I really don't. They added Juan Soto. I really wanted to put them in. As you heard, I thought I had them in, and by my own process of elimination, I don't have the Yankees. Like, my brain did the math for me. I don't think they're better than my wild cards, and we'll talk about them a little more after we reveal all of our wild cards. We'll see what we think about the Yankees. But if Garrett Cole is out for half the year or longer, there's no way they're going to the playoffs. And that's just pretty much what it boils down to. I think I would have them in. And I'll talk about Houston versus the Yankees, who are going to be missing Justin Verlander for some time. But I can't put the Yankees in right now. Where are you on this?
No, the Yankees aren't a playoff team. And they would barely be a playoff team with Garrett Cole.
They just don't have the rotation. Now, Nestor Cortez could bounce back, but they just, Rodon barely pitched last year, and when he was in there, he wasn't good.
This is the result of trading for Juan Soto. They wanted Juan Soto so bad that they gave away all the pitching that would have supported somebody like Garrett Cole and Nestor Cortez. They traded Mike King. They traded Randy Vasquez. They traded Johnny Brito. They've got some pitchers in the minor leagues. They may have to recycle Luis Heel with this injury to Cole. So they don't have, unless they go ahead and bite the bullet and sign a Blake Snell or sign a Jordan Montgomery, they're going to have, and by the way, their bullpen isn't that good. Their bullpen is Clay Holmes and a bunch of guys who are going to try to be reliable setup men. Tommy Kahnle is the guy who's got the biggest resume as a setup man, but he can never stay healthy.
He's listed as hurt right now, but that was from September.
So
I'm on roster resource on Fangraphs.
Jonathan Loizaga and Ian Hamilton.
They have those two and Caleb Ferguson listed as their top setup.
Well,
now.
Ferguson's arm's going to fall off this year because And by the way, in the Juan Soto deal, they traded Wandy Peralta, who was one of their most reliable setup men, to the Padres. So
their rotation is currently listed as Nestor Cortez, Carlos Rodon. They did add Marcus Stroman, but he wasn't healthy for half of last year either. Clark Schmidt and Clayton Beater. I mean, I like their lineup, but it's also a lineup that doesn't stay healthy either. So, I mean, this is one of those. This is why we started the show saying Jordan Montgomery and Blake Snell are still out there. If during this show the news were to break, Blake Snell to Yankees, Jordan Montgomery to Yankees, that would change the entire situation. Now, having said that, that is not going to change my division winner.
All right, so my pick in the American League East is also the Orioles. I think their job got a lot easier with Garrett Cole's injury because they won't have to face him at all when they play the Yankees in the first half of the season, and the same goes for all of the other teams in the American League East. The Orioles are eventually going to get John Means back in addition to Kyle Bradish, so they're going to have a really good rotation with Burns and Grayson Rodriguez. They're going to have a really good rotation. They have more young players than they know what to do with.
I think the biggest loss for them is Batista getting hurt.
Yeah.
They currently have Kimbrel as their closer. And he is reliable in a long-term season. He will close the door. He's what we call in fantasy kind of a dirty closer at this point. He's going to have an ERA, but he will get the saves when he really needs to. Can he hold up in the playoffs? Philly didn't feel like he did last year.
They're strong getting to him, all right? They're strong getting to him, and I think
guys like Cano and Tate.
Well, Yenier Cano was maybe, outside of Batista, the best relief pitcher in baseball. He was, in the first half of the season, he was impossible to score against. And he was an all-star along with Batista. Anyway, I picked the Orioles. I agree with you on the Blue Jays. Their rotation is very good. That's going to carry them. There was they added Justin Turner as their designated hitter, and he's just a really good hitter and run producer. So that helps them quite a bit. He essentially replaces Brandon Belt, who did a good job in his role last year. But I think Turner is an upgrade for him because he'll be able to play against both hands, and Belt was just playing against right-handers. And Belt is not physically as resilient as Turner has been up until this point of his career. But Turner is, I think, 39 this year. So there's an element of making sure you keep him off his feet. And the Jays play on an AstroTurf field, which is going to be an adjustment for Turner. Although he won't be playing the field.
So as a DH, he's only going to give Vlad days off and maybe a little. They have Isaiah Kiner-Falefa as their third baseman. Who was their third baseman last year?
Chapman.
Okay, so he's gone. But I mean, I agree with you. I picked them because they're pitching staff, and nothing says they won't go out and get someone else. Later in.
Well, I think they're in good shape. They've got a good rotation. You already ran it down, so I don't need to repeat it. So I have them as a wild card team because, I'm not going to take a team from the American League Central. The only team that's going to make the playoffs in the American League Central is going to be the winner of that division. So I have the Jays as my wild card team out of the East.
Well, on that note, let's hear your Central.
My Central, I'm going to even though they lost Sonny Gray to the Cardinals, I'm going to pick the Twins because they're still the better team, and they have a lot of young talent. People like Eddie Julian, who will play second base against right-handers, who's a phenomenal offensive player. They have some added power this year in Matt Wallner. He's a guy that could hit 35 home runs for them. They'd always been looking for that out of Max Kepler, and he's never been able to keep his batting average up, and then his power seems to have sort of subsided.
And he's listed as the right fielder.
Yeah, but I think Wallner will play against right-handed pitchers either as a DH or as a left fielder. And they've got Correa at shortstop. And by the way, another young player who is outstanding, who gets overshadowed in the American League and by all the talk of the Dodgers and the Reds' young players, is Royce Lewis, who is a phenomenal hitter, and he's going to play third base this year, and he's a great addition to that team. And I think their pitching will be good enough to win that division. So I could see them winning 88, 89 games and getting into the playoffs. Advancing is going to be a problem.
Last year, the Twins won the Central with 87 games, 87 wins.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I have the Twins as well. Tim was saying he's high on kind of some of the young talent of Kansas City. I told him I like Detroit better. I still think Cleveland's kind of the second best team, even though Tito Francona retired. I think Cleveland still has some pieces. Now, here's the catch. There's a lot of talk about Cleveland cleaning house and selling guys like Bieber, even potentially a Tristan McKenzie. So if Cleveland cleans out, then they're going to be completely out of it. Detroit has some nice young talent coming along. The White Sox, in trading off Cease, I mean, we'll get to over-unders later, but maybe hammer the under on them. They're not going to have a good year. So, yeah, I'm with you. Minnesota, I don't think they're as good as last year. They'll spend money in certain spots, so they could also be a dark horse landing spot for one of these two starting pitchers if they take one of these opt-out style deals. That's how they got Correa in the first place. The Astros didn't bring Correa back, and the Twins said, okay, well, we'll do this with opt-outs. And then it was like a 1 year and an opt-out, and then Correa ended up the whole thing last year where he signed with two teams who voided that contract, and he ends up back with the Twins. So I think the Twins could be a dark horse for one of these starting pitchers, but their division isn't very motivating for them to spend extra money.
All right, I don't think the Tigers are that far off from catching the Twins. They also have a lot of good young talent with Riley Green and Kerry Carpenter and Torkelson. They added Gio Urshela to sort of solidify third base for them defensively, and he's a good player. He's just a good player and a good person to have on your team. Mark Canha is going to play outfield for them. These are veteran guys to work with these younger players who are going to be productive. And they've got a nice rotation. They added Kenta Maeda, who came directly off the Twins roster, so that's a one added to the
it's
Tigers.
It's a net two.
And a negative for the Twins. Tariq Skubal was one of the best pitchers in the second half in the American League last year after he came back from his injury. Reese Olson had a nice short amount of time. He didn't pitch a full season for them because I think he started the year in the minors, but he looks like he's going to be a good player. They added Jack Flaherty, who has still not been able to get back to his form when he was at his best with the Cardinals. But, the way I look at it, he's their fifth starter. So you've added somebody who, if you can fix him, can be beneficial to you. So I don't think the Tigers are that far off, but it might be another year or so and adding another player. And they still have some other young players in the minor leagues that are still coming. Like Jace Young, who's the brother of Young, who plays third base for the Rangers, who's a good prospect. They're going to start Colt Keith at second base this year, and they think he's going to be a good player. He'll be a rookie. So I don't think they're that far off.
Something else they have that a lot of people don't talk about, their bullpen's not bad. We saw, again, another fantasy baseball reference here. We used a lot of different guys from that bullpen in the season last year. Alex Lang is the closer. Jason Foley had some time. Shelby Miller has been turned into a short innings reliever rather than the ace starting pitcher the Cardinals drafted him to be. And then Andrew Chafin just keeps plugging along at 33 as a lefty option. So they have an interesting bullpen.
Yeah, and Tyler Holton, who's another lefty they have, was really good for them when they brought him up from AAA last year. So their bullpen is one of their strengths.
What do you make of the wild, wild American West?
I still am going to go with the three teams that I talked about last year. The Astros to win the division. Even with Verlander hurt, they still have very good pitching. They added Josh Hader as their closer and pushed Presley back to the 8th inning and Brian Abreu back to the 7th inning. So that's probably the best 7th, 8th, and 9th inning setup in Major League Baseball. So you really only have to have somebody go 5 or 6 innings for you. They still have Framber Valdez. They still have Luis Garcia.
Do they? Do they have Luis Garcia? Oh yeah, I see him. Okay, he's injured. He had Tommy John actually.
They still have Christian Javier.
They may get Luis Garcia back at some point. He had Tommy John last May. But yes, Valdez, Javier, Urquidy, Brown, and France are listed as their rotation right now.
And Hunter Brown is going to be in their rotation, who was a rookie last year and a highly regarded prospect for them. And their lineup is their lineup. They're still, you have to go through Altuve, Bregman, Kyle Tucker, Yordan Alvarez. Now they have a guy who can hit behind the plate in Yanier Diaz, who's an outstanding hitter in terms of power. And I think they're still a really good team. Last spring training, Jeremy Pena was the hottest thing since sliced bread, and he didn't have quite the season that they were hoping for. But if now the pressure's off him, if he does, he's not under the spotlight anymore. If he can get a little bit more production, you've got all those other guys in the lineup with him. It's a very good team. They know how to win. They pulled the division out on the last weekend of the season last year, and I have to go with them until somebody shows me otherwise. I picked the Rangers. They won the World Series. They lost Jordan Montgomery.
For now.
They should get Jake DeGrom and Max Scherzer back in the second half of the year. So if they can just play above 500 until the All-Star game, they're going to be right in there with a chance to get to the playoffs. So I picked them for a wild card spot. And the Seattle Mariners, who I picked to make the playoffs last year, after they got in for the first time in a long time in 2022, just have too good of a pitching rotation not to consider them one of the top 6 teams in the American League, because Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, and Brian Wu, any team would take those 5 guys any day of the week. So I have the Mariners as my third wild card team. Astros, Rangers, Mariners, 3 teams from that division make the playoffs.
Who's your first out?
That's a hard one. Probably the Rays or the Yankees.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was. I had written Rays, but I'm going to go
I don't
Yankees.
think that other than the teams I've named, there are teams that are going to contend for anything in the American League. Nobody in the Central besides the Twins and maybe the Tigers.
Yeah, because I do think Cleveland's going to sell. I don't think they're going to keep their group together to compete.
The Indians just don't produce runs in order to compete in games. They'll be lucky to be 500 this year because their offense just isn't that imposing.
Well, real quick, my West, I have Texas winning the division. I thought about this a while. I thought, yeah, the Astros, they just seem to do it every year. The Rangers almost did it last year. They did have a banged-up rotation at the end. They still were able to get in. They were one win.
The Astros are going to get Verlander back. And
yes.
They're going to get him back before, before June.
The way I see this is if I know Eovaldi has a stint every year where he gets hurt, but if they can get Eovaldi and Gray pitch well, Heaney was good when they needed him to be in the playoffs. Dane Dunning's kind of up and down, and they're putting Cody Bradford in the rotation at the moment. Doesn't mean they won't sign Montgomery, but it's looking less likely. But they add David Robertson. I think that's big, that he replaces Chapman essentially.
He may end up being the closer.
They've got Leclerc, Robertson, both as closer options. Spores closed out the World Series last year. They had Kirby Yates. I just feel like they've done enough to make themselves a little bit better than they were during the regular season last year, despite, they didn't have DeGrom for most of the year. They went with very similar to this rotation for a lot of the year. They added Scherzer late, and then he wasn't with them all that much. He got hurt pretty quick. So I think adding Evan Carter for a whole season, you do lose Mitch Garver, who is just a professional hitter, but I think having Wyatt Langford potentially come up and be a big part of this team, they're going to hit. No matter who's in that lineup, they're going to hit. Seager's banged up right now, but he'll be fine. Lowe's banged up right now. He'll be fine. Seager has sports hernia surgery. He'll probably miss opening day, but I think this team will be okay. I think they'll get the pitching together. I think they'll make trades when they need to. I feel like they're slowly overtaking the Astros. Now, flip that coin. Either way, I have both those teams in. Astros are one of my first wild cards, and I have Seattle for the same reason, that pitching staff. God, I want to find a reason to say the Yankees can make the playoffs, but they don't have enough pieces.
They're not in the class of these other teams that we're talking about. They could win the Central Division, but they're not in the Central Division.
The Yankees are built for 2018. Like, if you take some of the players they have and go back, wind the clock back a little bit, they've got some pitching, but not enough, and they've got some big boppers. And the way the game is right now, you cannot have. The Cardinals saw it. They had offense last year and no pitching. The Yankees have some good pitchers, but not enough of them. Guys who are going to stay healthy. So I have them as my first out. You said, I didn't write this down. You said Baltimore,
the Twins, the Astros, and the three wild cards are the Blue Jays, the Rangers, and the Mariners.
And Seattle.
But, here's the thing about all these teams.
And you said Yankees, Tampa.
One of those two will be the first
Yeah,
out.
and I'll just write the same thing. We both were talking about the same kind of thing there. Since we gave ourselves two first outs in the American League, pick a National League team. I'm gonna go Cincinnati as my other first out. I think potentially
Cubs first out.
You have Cubs first out. Who would be your second in the National League? Since we both said Yankees and Tampa, we'll just pick another team in the National League you think has a chance to make the playoffs, but you just don't have them in. Whether that be Miami, the Mets, Cardinals, the Brewers.
I don't know.
Giants.
To me, all of those teams are.
They're all flawed.
They're all 500 teams at best. I think the Cardinals are probably a little bit better. The Mets are going into the season with Senga hurt, almost no starting pitcher. Jose Quintana is going to start their
opening day. Well, he started our first playoff game a couple years ago. Let's look at that Mets rotation real quick, just for kicks. The Mets have Quintana, health risk. Severino, health risk. Manaea, health risk. Adrian Hauser, health risk last year, but he's generally been okay. And Tyler McGill.
Yeah, that's not, what you just named is 5 number 5 starters. That's what you just named.
Yeah.
So I don't. But there are people that would look at the Cardinals and say, outside of Sonny Gray,
that's what a lot of the fans have been saying.
You're running a lot of 4 and 5 starters out there if they were in other rotations.
So you're saying Cardinals are your other?
I guess I'm just gonna begrudgingly say the Cardinals because I don't see a lot of other good teams out there.
I feel like that's kind of what the playoffs has done. If you're close enough, you try a little bit or more, or unless you're part of that elite group. But if you're not, a lot of teams just aren't trying. It's like, we'll take a couple years off and see what happens. And I think that's what all these sports have done with having 8 teams in a conference, or NFL is talking about adding an extra week, maybe adding an extra playoff team, and with baseball, a lot of these teams saw what the Phillies and the Diamondbacks did in the National League the last 2 years, where the Phillies and the Diamondbacks were the NLCS. They were both wild cards. So it's really interesting what it's done. And the other dynamic about baseball right now that you and I talk about is the, quote, balanced schedule, where it used to be you'd play your division really heavy. So the Cardinals could benefit from having a bad division. But then now, since you play all the teams every year, one series at least, you're losing division games, you're losing National League games. A team like Texas, Seattle, and Houston, where they'd have to battle out of their division, well, they might be battling out of, somebody playing the Pirates at the end of the year. I haven't looked at the schedules, but the balanced schedule has changed the dynamic of making the expanded playoffs.
The schedule is one thing. If you play in a weak division, you're rewarded for that in the regular season, and you're punished for it in the postseason, because you're maybe not prepared to face the caliber of team that comes out of, the East or the West in both leagues now. If you win the Central Division in either league.
This is what people are saying about the Cardinals, is they're building this team to just get in and hope for the best. They're not building it to compete with Atlanta or the Dodgers.
Teams, there's only a handful of teams that their front offices build a team to try to win the World Series. Instead, they build a team to win their division or to get a playoff spot, and then hope when they get into the playoffs they can pull the upset.
Now, that's the knock on the Cubs right now. The Cardinals are being accused of trying to win their division.
If you're going to do
that, the Cubs owners are being accused of, we were like a game back last year. Let's run it back with the exact same team, and if we have a little better luck, here's the flaw in that. If you're a Cubs fan, do you think the Cardinals are going to win more than 71 games this year? If the Cardinals are any better, then your team that was pretty good last year has another opponent in front of them. I mean, the Texas Rangers in Houston only had to deal with Seattle in the second half, but if Seattle's good from the get-go, that's a 3-team race, even though it was at the end. It's completely different.
Well, the Dodgers, the way they operate is they try to build a team to win the World Series. And I can't even name, other than the Astros, and maybe now Texas, none of the other teams seem to do that. I guess you could throw the Braves in there.
And we don't know what the Orioles are going to be like with the new ownership, because right now they don't need to do it. They did go out and get Burns, but because of how many young players they have, elite young players, it'll be interesting to see in the second half if the Orioles have a chance to do what they did again last year. Will their new ownership group say, hey, go get Shane Bieber to add to our rotation, or so-and-so, or would they add a Jordan Montgomery right now with Bradish hurt? So we'll see how some of these teams do.
I don't think the Orioles are going to. They're not going to sign anybody long term and block any of their young players. Their young players, many of them are proving to be better than what's out there. The Rangers are learning this with Evan Carter and maybe with Wyatt Langford. You have to be careful, because you may be spending a lot and trading a lot to get something that isn't as good as ultimately what you already have.
All right, real quick, last part of this segment. Give me your league champions.
Dodgers. There's no way I can figure out a way not to pick them. And I'm going to pick the Astros. I mean, I pick the Astros a lot, but they've played in the last 7 American League Championship Series.
And for kicks, who's winning that World Series?
The Dodgers.
Dodgers?
And because, I mean, how can you not pick the Dodgers? If they don't win, that's their problem. They are built to win everything.
So I'm picking against the Dodgers. I think Atlanta has enough pitching to go up against the Dodgers, and I think they have a good enough lineup that you get into a 7-game series, Atlanta can win. My problem is in the American League. I would like to take Texas. I don't think Texas is going to run the Magic back necessarily. I'm having a hard time not taking Baltimore with everything they have
Well,
going
Bruce
on.
Bochy wins every other year, so you can take
That's
Texas
true.
next year.
That's true. I'm going to take Atlanta beating Baltimore. So we've got Atlanta, Baltimore, or Dodgers, Houston.
Yeah.
So I talked about it on the Super Bowl show, and you missed it. I kind of made fun of some people because fans are always like, we want to see something different. We're sick of seeing Dodgers, Houston. We'll say that. But then last year when we had Arizona and Texas, people said, well, no one cares about these two teams. No one knows who they are. Exactly. So I have Atlanta, Baltimore, something that's a little bit different, even though Atlanta won the World Series in 21.
Oh, Atlanta's a really good team.
Oh, yes, they are.
And they are probably in the National League the closest thing to the Dodgers. They're very solid. Their bullpen's great. Their rotation's great. We talked about it. Their lineup's great. They added Adam Duvall, third time he's been with the Braves.
Was that in the last few days?
That was today.
Okay, I saw him on that team.
So he's gonna. So they brought in Jared Kelenic, who was with the Mariners and has never lived up to his number one prospect ranking. And they're going to play him in the outfield, but I think what they're going to do with him is they're going to platoon him. They have an awfully good lineup, and they're the closest thing to the Dodgers that you can name.
So that is our World Series predictions. I have Atlanta beating Baltimore. He has Dodgers beating Houston. I'll add in the comments or another segment if Tim gets his predictions back to me. He is working today, so I bothered him, but if we get some information from him, I can always add that on later. Maybe in the comments section when he tells me, I can always just add that instead of doing a whole other segment. Without Mr. Bradshaw, but with his help retroactively, when we come back, we'll get into some win total over-under betting. Just kind of quickly go down the list. StraussNet Sports Radio, Spring Training Edition. Welcome back to StraussNet Sports Radio. One final thing I wanted to touch on before I let you all go today. Over-unders. Mr. Bradshaw, Tim, our other co-host, who's not with us today, but he did give me some information. Now, this was back on February 24th. I will give you updated. But he sent me on February 24th every single over-under on win totals for the year. So you can bet. So, for example, the St. Louis Cardinals over-under, when he sent this to me, was 85.5 wins. That means you can take over, so they have to win 86 or more, or under. They have to win 85 or fewer. And he just sent me every number, didn't give me any context, not what he was thinking, and I gave him some of the things I was thinking. Now, I'll give you some updated, because obviously some of the things we talked about have changed. The first thing that stood out to me, I said Arizona over 84.5 wins. Now, this was a minus number, so it was minus 115. If you bet $115, you get 100, as opposed to a plus, where if the Cardinals were plus 115 for over 85.5, if I bet 100, I get $115 back, along with my original bet, for those of you who don't know betting. So he said Arizona over 84.5 was the number. I liked the over. He didn't tell me what he liked. I just told him what I liked, and I think he agreed with me there. Right now, they're at 83.5 on FanDuel. Now, I am not sponsored. I just use FanDuel because that's what's here at the local casino, so I've started looking at their website. Circa Sports, who I've been told different numbers by other friends, have supposedly better numbers. On wherever Tim is getting his numbers from, it was that 84.5. Right now is 83.5 for Arizona. What do you think about 84.5, 83.5 for Arizona? You like the over?
I take the over on that.
Yes. So we both kind of agree there. The second number I had was Atlanta under 101.5. I'm going to lump Atlanta and the Dodgers together, who had 103.5. And then there's another one on here. Let me find them real quick. I am scrolling on my phone. The Yankees were 93.5 wins for their number. First of all, I told Tim, anytime you see a team with 100 wins or more as an over and under, take the under. Things go wrong. Teams aren't supposed to win 100 games. It's just really hard to do. So what the Orioles did last year, what the Red Sox did in 18, that's hard to do. Take the under. Someone's going to get hurt. You might be wrong, but it's really easy to take under 100 wins in an over-under. And he agreed with me. That doesn't mean the Dodgers and the Braves aren't going to have like 90-plus wins, win their division, go to the LCS, and win the World Series. But it's hard to bet that the team's going to be over. And the numbers were minus. They were negative money. Like I said, Cardinals were 85.5 wins. Let's see what they are right now today, so I can give you reference. They have the Cardinals at 84.5 wins. That's probably after Sonny Gray got hurt and Nootbaar and Edman to start the season. I said take the over because the Cardinals in 22, where is it? 22, they won, well, that's last year. They won 71 last year. They won like 90, I think they won 91 or 93 games in 22. So I feel like they can win over 85.5 games.
I'm going to take the under. The Cardinals don't play the same schedule they played in 22. They play out of their division more than they used to, and that's not good for them, especially not in the National League or when you have to play the American League and you have to face teams like the Astros and the Rangers and the Orioles and the Jays, teams that you didn't have to play very often in the past. So it's more games against good teams. I know people say, well, there's more games against bad teams too because you get to play the AL Central. But I'm going to take the under on the Cardinals. I think it's not easy to win, 71 games last year? It's not easy to win 15 more games. So I'm going to take the under.
Essentially what I'm saying is that last year was an anomaly, but at the same time, I think what it all comes down to, and this is even with what I talked to Tim about at work, the 85.5 is a great number, like a very true number. If you say Cardinals are probably going to win 85 games, 86 games, 84 games, that sounds about right. It's hard to say, oh, they're going to be better than that or a lot worse than that. I don't think they'll be as bad as last year, but so that's what I thought on the Cardinals. Now, I don't feel as strongly about that.
Think about it. The Cardinals could win 10 more games this year, and they'd only have 81 wins.
Yes. And a lot goes into that. Someone can present all sorts of options on the Cardinals. Like you could say, Sonny Gray is just continuously hurt. They're going to be as bad as they were last year. They don't have their stopper. You could say Lance Lynn's going to be better than last year, and the Cardinals are going to have their two pitchers, and they're going to win 20 more games than last year. I don't know. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's a team like the Cardinals is hard to judge because there's so many things that we thought would go right last year that didn't. But let's see what the Cubs number is.
But see, here's the thing, and this is what I know. A lot of people talk about a team because they have a reputation and a high standard and a resume of success. But the Cardinals are already having problems. Their center fielder is hurt, Tommy Edman, after wrist surgery. He has not been able to do anything in spring training. They don't know when he's going to be able to start doing anything to get ramped up. Lars Nootbaar has rib injuries from a play landing on his arm defensively during a game. So two of their outfielders are hurt. They're going into the season without two established players to begin with and a starting pitching rotation that, while, yes, they've rebuilt it, it's still a question mark because you're bringing in two of the three pitchers you're bringing in are guys who they're not top-tier rotation guys. So it's a huge question mark for them. And I just don't see them improving enough to be anything better. Maybe they'd be slightly better than 500, but I think it would be very marginal. And I don't see them winning. Again, if they won 10 more games this year, which is a great improvement for any team that's trying to get better, they still only have 81 victories, and that's a 500 team.
Pretty much the way everybody, whether it be on the radio or fans, are talking about the Cardinals. You got two groups, people, and I never say I'm not a Cardinal homer. But I give you the logic and the reasoning that I think it's going to be one way or another. And I was very critical of them in the offseason, so don't think I'm just, they're going to win because they are. There's people like me who think the Cardinals should be better for the sake of being better, and they made some additions, and they could be even better than they are. See, I think I'm being critical of them because I think they're not trying to compete with the top teams, but I also think that they're going to be better. And then there's the other crowd, like you, where they haven't done all that much. And what's the reason to think that they're going to be significantly better?
You know, a team can be entertaining and be a 500 team. When your expectations, and I don't mean you particularly, but when somebody's expectations are maybe unreasonable based on current circumstances, that's when people are disappointed. If the Cardinals won 10 more games this year, and they brought some of these young players along, and Jordan Walker's better than he was last year, and he was pretty good last year, and Victor Scott comes up and he has an impact, and Dylan Carlson plays better offensively, and I can go on down the list. And Paul Goldschmidt's better. And by the way, that's a big question mark, whether Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado are going to recapture the form that they had previous to last year. Now, they weren't bad last year. It's just that historically in their careers, they have been such good players that they could carry and make up for a lot of the other players who weren't as productive as them, but they're not at the stage of their career now where they're maybe capable of doing that, and it may be too much to ask of them. You know, Arenado hit 30 home runs last year, nothing wrong with that. He produced runs last year, nothing wrong with that. He wasn't happy with his year last year. Goldschmidt wasn't happy with his year last year. A lot of players would love to have the stats they had last year. The problem is that they've had to be so good in the past and have been so good that it covers up for what you're lacking in other areas. That you could carry a catcher like Yadier Molina who hit a little bit, but not a lot, and had great defense because you had other guys around you who could do so much. So I think a lot of what Cardinal fans are hoping for is that Goldschmidt and Arenado return to what they were before last year. And if they do that, then they may have a chance to win a few more games. Make the playoffs? I don't know.
Somewhat like what you're saying, having expectations versus being entertained. Like I always use the example, the Patriots, the year Brady left, they had Cam Newton. There were no expectations there, and I kind of had fun with it, and they didn't make the playoffs. And then over the past couple of seasons, where Mac Jones didn't live up to expectations, and maybe they had the same record, not last year, but the year before, and it was like, well, I had more fun the year where they weren't supposed to win anything, and that's kind of the complaint people have about the Blues right now. So that's the Cardinals. The Cubs are actually at 83.5 wins, and they won 83 games last year.
I take the over on the Cubs. I think the Cubs are, like I said, they're my first team out of the playoffs in the National League. They might get close. They might win 85, 86 games and not make the playoffs.
I'm going to save the White Sox for a moment. We were talking about the Cubs. I'll save the White Sox just because that's changed. San Diego, actually, they're tied together. San Diego was 81.5. White Sox were 64.5. Why are they tied together, Aaron? Because Dylan Cease got traded from one to the other. So let's look at San Diego now. San Diego today is at 83.5 wins. So they only gave them 2 more wins. I'm taking the over on that. I think they're a good team. Like you mentioned about the prospects, I know they don't have Blake Snell. I think Dylan Cease will be better. We saw Lance Lynn get better getting out of Chicago. Dylan Cease is still young. I think he's still got something in the tank there.
I agree. Take the over on San Diego. You know, I said San Diego would make the playoffs, so clearly they're going to win more than 81 or 82 games if they're going to make the playoffs. So I would have taken San Diego as an over at 81.5. I'd take them at 83.5 because you're going to need more than 84 wins to make the playoffs. And the White Sox, without Cease, and by the way, they're moving Michael Kopech to the bullpen, so he won't be in the starting rotation either, and might be their closer for the few times they need one this year. I was very reluctant before to take the White Sox as an under because I think it's very hard to lose that many games. Just like it's hard to win 100 games, it's hard to lose 100 games. But now without Dylan Cease, I'd be inclined to take the under on that. But I will say that of all of the numbers that you've thrown out here today, the one I feel the most confident about is take the over on San Diego.
Oh, it's not Arizona, not Arizona 84.5.
Well, I think Arizona is probably going to be over.
They're more in the ballpark, so to speak.
I think adding Dylan Cease to the rotation and Michael King to make up for Seth Lugo does make up in part for the loss of Juan Soto. Okay?
Now, the White Sox, we were talking about the White Sox, so they were 64.5. They are now 60.5.
Oh, it's 60. It's not 62. See, I thought
No, it was 64.5. They are now at 60.5 wins.
Well, at 62.5, I'd take the under. At 60.5, I don't know what to do. And I know that's only a difference of 2. But
now, you and I got into this on...
Again, what you're saying, if you take the under on the White Sox, is that they're going to lose over 100 games because you play 162 games. So you're saying... If it's 60.5, you're saying the most that they're going to win is 60 games, which means they're going to lose 102 games. So my question to you is, if you always take the under on a team that is being forecast to win over 100 games, wouldn't you also
take the over
on a team that's forecast to lose 100 or more games?
That's good logic. Now, we talked about this I talked about this.
And again, the White Sox are in the worst division.
With Mike Rizzo on Pure Sports Radio 101. He was asking my opinion on some of these numbers and the White Sox. And you texted into us, the 1962 Mets won 40 games and lost 120. Now, looking at that same ledger, the 1967 Mets won 61 and lost 101.
Yeah, but that's a different era.
That's
you
true.
couldn't move players around like you can now. It was a whole different situation, and this is important. There weren't 30 teams back then. There were 20. Actually, at the time, there were 20 teams in 1962, 10 in each league, which means that a lot of the players that, if you had a 30-team league, would have normally been minor league players in a 20-team league. You were playing, for that era, a better level of competition, if you understand what I'm trying to say,
yes.
And I'm not saying it very well. With a 30-team league, you have a lot of guys who are thrown in, especially the back ends of these pitching rotations. You know, when you went into St. Louis, you faced Bob Gibson and Steve Carlton, and when you went into Chicago, you faced Fergie Jenkins and Bill Hands, and when you went into San Francisco, Mike McCormick and Juan Marichal, and you faced great pitchers on every team. That doesn't happen now. So it's harder to lose that many games now.
That's a good way of putting it. And with so many teams tanking or not trying. But there you go. There's some over-unders. Those are our futures bets. We've talked about the division winners. We've picked the World Series, in my case, kind of reluctantly, because there are so many good. It's like all the good teams are really good, and then everybody who's not a playoff team really isn't a playoff team. So that's spring training. Enjoy the next couple of weeks of that. I hope you enjoy your NCAA tournament. To all who watch that, I'll be watching it to a degree. I just haven't been keyed in on it the same way. Chiefs are still champions, and then we got Stanley Cup playoff hockey around the corner. I mentioned I kind of want to put a couple of bucks on the New York Rangers to win the conference and the Stanley Cup. We'll see. I'll tell you, the Blues a couple weeks ago were plus 25,000 to win the Stanley Cup. So if you want to put $5 on something that might bring you some money in, there you go. But aside from that, we'll see how the Stanley Cup playoffs go. Busy coming up. I will try to do a Stanley Cup playoff preview. But until then, happy opening day. Enjoy baseball season. Enjoy your fantasy drafts. You've done one. I have 2 coming up. We will see you next time on StraussNet Sports Radio. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
And like I said, we'll see you next time on StraussNet Sports Radio.
Life sucks, so let's dance. Life sucks, so let's dance. Yeah, baby, if we have some fun, we won't feel so bad. Life sucks, so so let's dance. Life sucks, so let's dance. Yeah, maybe if we have some fun. Maybe if we have some fun. Maybe if we have some fun, we won't feel so bad.